Diego Lopes has skyrocketed to the top of the featherweight division. It's taken him just over 700 days to go from entering the UFC to earning a title shot against the former champ Alexander Volkanovski. His mullet, his aggressive striking, his elite grappling and his mullet have all made him must-watch TV in the UFC. But just how good is Diego Lopes, and what are his chances of beating one of the greatest featherweights of all time this weekend? We're going to be getting into all of that in today's video, as well as ending with a final prediction. Yes guys, welcome back to Fight Energy. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you enjoyed my most recent video about Paddy Pimblett and Michael Chandler. Thank you for all the kind comments and feedback for that one. But in today's video, we're turning our attention to that main event, Alexander Volkanovski against Diego Lopes. And because the focus of this video is how good is Diego Lopes, we need to start by assessing his level of competition this weekend, because we can only rate Diego Lopes so highly based on who he's fighting. And the question that's been on everyone's lips in the build-up to this fight, is Alexander Volkanovski washed? Is he finished? Is he washed? Is he still that same fighter who beat Max Holloway 3 times, who looked invincible against the Korean Zombie? Or is he now that fighter who's just faced back-to-back KO losses? Has his chin gone? Is he not the same fighter? And this is a really important question to answer, because it will set the bar on how much credit we can give Diego Lopes based on this performance this upcoming weekend. I'm still leaning towards Volkanovski not being washed, and there are a couple of reasons for this. Don't get me wrong, these back-to-back losses, back-to-back KO losses were bad, and his chin definitely could have been compromised. But there are a couple of caveats that I do have for these performances. Firstly, you all know the Islam Makhachev KO loss. He was up a weight at 155 pounds. He took a clean head kick that would have knocked out any featherweight. Not only this, it was a short notice fight. I know that argument's been done to death, but it's only been done to death because it is a valid argument. He took a late notice fight, moved up a weight class, and it was a disaster for him. Next, the Ilia Topuria fight back at 145 pounds against one of the hardest hitting 145 pounders we've ever seen. He just knocked out Max Holloway, who supposedly has a legendary uncrackable chin. Ilia Topuria cracked it. So being knocked out by a 155 pounder but through a head kick, and Ilia Topuria, one of the hardest hitting featherweights we've ever seen, doesn't make you chinny, it doesn't make you washed. It just means that he fell short against the absolute elite of the UFC. If that makes him washed, then a hell of a lot more fighters are washed too. Now don't get me wrong, like fighters coming back after any brutal knockout, there is a chance that his chin has gone, but when I look back at Volkanovski's record, he hasn't been in that many wars, that many brutal wars. Yes, the Max Holloway trilogy, particularly in the first 2 fights, he did take a couple of big shots. I remember he got dropped to a knee, I think, in the second fight, but he isn't one of these fighters that you pick out and think that he's been in a load of wars. Even the first Islam Makhachev fight, he didn't take a whole load of punishment. So for that reason, I am saying that if Diego Lopes beats this version of Alexander Volkanovski, we can class this as a truly elite win, and we'll be rating Lopes very highly. So with that being said, if we are expecting a very good version of Volkanovski, I think it's fair to say that this will be the best fighter that Diego Lopes has faced since his UFC debut against Movsar Evloev. Now what a debut this was. Evloev is just one of the best grapplers in the division, if not the best grappler in the division. You saw what he did against Aljamain Sterling. And what a horrible debut for Diego Lopes to be chucked into by the UFC. In this fight, it was fairly competitive, and they spoke a lot about a rematch immediately after this fight. Nothing materialised, but it's definitely a fight we could see later down the line, because Evloev is probably only 1 win away from a title shot. And a really important thing to note, and it will come up when we discuss the grappling comparables between Lopes and Volkanovski, is the fact that Lopes was attempting submissions against Evloev in that debut fight. Despite the grappling advantage seemingly going towards Evloev, Diego Lopes, he wasn't settling for bottom position or just trying to get up. He was going for submission attempts of his own. Since that loss, Lopes is unbeaten in the UFC. His most notable victories coming against Dan Ige. I think it was on 2 hours notice or something for Dan Ige. That fight where he happened to be in Miami and he just showed up. I think it was Miami or Vegas, I can't remember. But he was just 2 hours away on the couch, heard about the other fighter pulling out and he stepped up. And then Brian Ortega. Lopes faced Ortega at UFC Noche in the Sphere. almost finishing him in the first round and then cruising to a convincing decision victory. However, based on that record, you can see that Alexander Volkanovski is going to be a true step up. He's a lot tougher, a lot more powerful, a lot more dynamic striking than the fighters I just mentioned. Other than Evloev, who has the advantage definitely when it comes to the grappling, Volkanovski is better all round than the opponents he's faced so far, so we will need to see the best version of Diego Lopes this Saturday if he's going to beat Volkanovski. Now let's take a look at the attributes, both of these fighters' attributes, how they compare heading into this matchup. And because we just spoke about Lopez's loss to Evloev, where grappling was a major component of it, I do want to start with the grappling. How Volk, how Lopes, how they compare with each other when it comes to submission threat and wrestling. Now, Volkanovski is such a well-rounded fighter. He's gone through his career being able to mix up the striking, the grappling when it gets early, submission defense, particularly against Brian Ortega, where he was locked up in some really, really dangerous moments. So Volkanovski is solid everywhere. He's a fighter who's happy to keep it on the feet, but against a really dynamic striker like Yair Rodriguez, Volkanovski was able to bully him, throw him around and get him out of there early. The guy's an absolute tank. If you've heard Joe Rogan speaking about him at all, you'll know that he came down from like 250 pounds or something like that, down to featherweight, and he's just a ball of muscle. He can bully most fighters, but I just can't see him doing that to Diego Lopes. Setting aside this level of skill when it comes to their grappling, just from a pure physicality basis, Yair Rodriguez, he's a skinnier, a slimmer build, not like Diego Lopes. And Alexander Volkanovski had so many physical advantages over him. But Diego Lopes, he's a young, very muscular guy, very strong. I don't think Volkanovski will be able to dictate the physicality so much. Diego Lopes seems like a really strong guy. And not only is he a very strong guy, he is also an elite grappler, a very, very high level black belt. As we mentioned in the Evloev fight, he was going for the submissions. Despite being taken down by Evloev many times, he was still looking for that submission. Following that loss to Evloev, Lopes got a submission victory against Gavin Tucker via armbar. Now, armbars are something that you don't see so much at the tip of the spear of the UFC. The top 5, top 10 guys very rarely get submitted via armbar. And whilst Gavin Tucker is lower level opposition, it still showed a great range of submissions for Lopes to be able to pull this off in the octagon. Also, when you look back at the Brian Ortega fight, there were question marks about why he didn't finish that fight earlier, because it did seem as though he really had Ortega rocked. Now, don't get me wrong, we all know how tough Ortega is. In that Max Holloway fight, he really demonstrated that. But after the fight, Diego Lopes said that he wanted to submit Brian Ortega, and that's why he didn't get him out of there. And now, whether you believe that or not, it does show his self-belief when it comes to his grappling, prepared to go toe-to-toe with one of the greatest grapplers the featherweight division's ever seen in Brian T-City Ortega. That would have been something special. Either way, he didn't get the submission there, but hopefully that does tell you something about his level of jiu-jitsu. So I think on balance, when you're looking at the grappling, I'd probably give the takedown and physicality to Volkanovski just. Although Diego Lopes is strong, I think that Volkanovski, he's just a tank. I just can't see anyone bullying him. But when it comes to the submission threat, I'm definitely edging towards Diego Lopes. I think his range of submissions will be greater, but realistically, I can't see this one ending via submission. I just keep going back to Volkanovski against Brian Ortega, getting out of that mounted guillotine, having Craig Jones in his corner. I'm not sure if Craig Jones is in his corner for this fight. I've not really seen them training together. Please let me know in the comments below if they are training together. But either way, Alexander Volkanovski has great takedowns, great takedown defense, and very good submission defense. So I don't think that this fight is going to be won via the grappling. So let's move on to the striking, and I guess that is equally as tough to measure. But if we're going to start by Diego Lopes, he's definitely very aggressive, very hard hitting. If you look at the Brian Ortega fight in that first round, he landed a couple of clean shots to almost get Ortega out of there. And if you do look back at the replay, it seems that the first one shuts his lights off, and then the other one wakes him up, and he followed it up by some really nasty, aggressive striking. I think when you look at the comparables, Volkanovski maybe has cleaner in and out striking, a bit crisper, but Diego Lopes does seem heavier handed, and against a fighter whose chin is being questioned in Alexander Volkanovski, this could be a really dangerous matchup if it's kept on the feet. Now, if I'm looking at potential flaws or weaknesses in each guy's striking, I would argue that Diego Lopes is slightly reckless. I don't want to give him too much credit for that Brian Ortega fight, because Brian Ortega is very guilty of keeping his head on the centre line. He looked like a different fighter in that Korean Zombie fight, if you want to watch that back. But other than in that fight, Brian Ortega keeps his head on the centre line, has a high chin. If you remember in his fight against Max Holloway had to show him how to guard because every strike was getting through. So for Diego Lopes to really put it on Brian Ortega early, I credit him for the aggression and landing those shots. You have to hit the target, but it wasn't the most intricate setup, the most difficult striking. Diego Lopes has a really aggressive striking style that will suit him against a lot of opposition, but he can leave himself vulnerable to the counter. And you saw this in his fight against Dan Ige. Dan Ige is a very dangerous striker, again slightly reckless at times, but whenever Diego Lopes would lunge in and miss with a big shot, Dan Ige would catch him on the way in. And if Dan Ige can do this to you, Volkanovski definitely can. I really respect the intelligence of Volkanovski's striking. I think it's often an overlooked part of his game, the fact that he's able to get in and out so quickly and set traps for his opposition. I think that because of his loss to Ilia Topuria, people just think his striking's terrible. But before that finish, it was very competitive on the feet. I know it's easy to say that, and that Ilia Topuria was just stalking him, because he was. Ilia Topuria was stalking him, waiting to get his distance, get his range, and then unload his weapons, which is exactly what he was doing. But that doesn't take away from Volkanovski's ability to set traps, to lure fighters into them. He was able to catch Topuria a couple of times by letting him walk onto his shots, and I can see him doing something similar against Diego Lopes. So whilst I am leaning towards a grappling advantage to Diego Lopes, the striking, I'm still favouring Volkanovski. If you're looking at durability, because I do want to sort of have that under the umbrella of striking, you'd like to think that Diego Lopes has less miles on the clock. He's the younger fighter, the fresher fighter, so Volkanovski may be more vulnerable there. But when it comes to pure striking, I do think that Volkanovski has the advantage. I think he's got the ability, I think he's got the capability, and I think he'll demonstrate it in this fight. His ability to lure Diego Lopes onto his shots, taking one or two steps back and leading Diego Lopes onto a big right hand. So if we're going to take an overall look about how these fighters match up skill for skill, I think both of them are very well-rounded fighters. Now, I know at the top of the divisions in the UFC in 2025, this is more common than not. It's rarer nowadays to have complete specialists like Alex Pereira with his kickboxing. But both of these fighters are so well-rounded, both physically very strong, both very good grapplers, very good strikers. So this means that we have to look at more of the intangibles. And one glaring intangible for me is experience. And Volkanovski has bags of it. I know that Diego Lopes has a lot of fights on his record already for a relatively young fighter. But when you look at the level of competition faced, Volkanovski's on a whole nother level. And I think this has to count for something. Volkanovski has loads of 5-round experience. He's had to dig deep at times. He saw against Brian Ortega in the Max Holloway trilogy. And this does play a major part in my prediction. We're going to get onto that very shortly. On the other hand, I think the youthful hunger, almost naivety of Diego Lopes will actually benefit him in this fight. It's a huge stage UFC 314 main event, but I don't think he'll be overawed by it. I think he'll go in there hungry, prepared to take Volkanovski's head off early. And everything we've seen so far in the build-up shows that he's a fighter full of confidence. He recognises that this is a huge opportunity for him to get his hands on UFC gold. So with that in mind, let's move on to my prediction. And my prediction, I don't want to sit on the fence, but it does hang on the balance. And this is the 2.5 rounds balance, where I think it favours one fighter over the other. In the first 2.5 rounds, I see it as Diego Lopes' fight to lose. I can't see him being submitted or KO'd in the first 2.5 rounds, but I can see him knocking out Alexander Volkanovski in the first 2.5 rounds, or possibly hurting him really badly and then submitting him via arm triangle or something like that. I did say that Volkanovski's submission defense was amazing, but if he's badly rocked, badly hurt by Diego Lopes, that's another story. When Ortega had him in these compromised positions, he wasn't really hurt, he still had his wits about him, whereas if Lopes is able to hurt him, then get him down, he could get him out of there. However, if the fight goes past 2.5 rounds, I lean all the other way over to Volkanovski, winning a decision, winning a comprehensive decision, showing that experience, those levels, and just having Diego Lopes swinging into thin air. I can see that happening as well. Volkanovski, he's not slow, he's still really quick. He looked quick in that Ilia Topuria fight until he didn't. I can see his footwork getting him out of a lot of trouble and making a slightly more reckless striker like Diego Lopes looking a level below. Now, I know this prediction isn't going to satisfy you people, and ultimately the aim of this video was to tell you how good Diego Lopes is. I'm going to put my neck on the line and say that Diego Lopes gets it done, and he gets it done early. We see a real passing of the guard in the featherweight division. Volkanovski, who knows if he continues. But the point of this video, like I said, was how good is Diego Lopes. I think this performance will show that he is very good. He's very ready for a rematch with Movsar Evloev if that is next. And he really cements himself as one of the best fighters in the UFC. We said at the start of the video that Diego Lopes has it all. Has the mullet, has the aggressive style, has the grappling. If he can put it all together, get his hands on UFC gold, I can see a really exciting run as a title holder. Now, I will be doing a video on Sunday once we get the results in from this fight, breaking down exactly what happened. But let's just say that Diego Lopes does win, and he wins conclusively. What do I think's next for the champion? I think the featherweight division is in a fantastic place. We've got bags of new talent entering. We've got Aaron Pico from the PFL and Patricio Pitbull coming in. He's fighting Yair Rodriguez. The winner of that, arguably, things move so quickly, could get a title shot. We've got the potential Evloev rematch. The featherweight division is on fire at a time where the UFC is coming under a lot of fire itself about how poor, how lacking in name value a lot of these events have been. Diego Lopes has an opportunity to really light the match and get things going again. I cannot wait for this fight. Let me know if you guys agree with my assessment of just how good Diego Lopes is based on the fight coming up this weekend. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.